So I am Pippin, or Øyvind Kolas. This is my website. And what I'm going to talk about is GEGL, which is GIMP's new rendering engine and backend. Traditionally, GIMP has had many plugins for doing operations on images. And when you've been using filters in GIMP, you have been changing the image you have open, and you can undo what you did, and you can add new filters. GEGL allows you to create chains of operations and then change parameters of them or change the order of them without having to undo and then change your mind and reapply and redo the things. You cannot already do that in GIMP, but practically all the plugins in GIMP have imported to be GEGL operations. And GIMP is using GEGL for doing its rendering and all pixel manipulation. And when we get 2.10 out later this year, as was promised in the State of Libre Graphics, GIMP 3.0 will be released. And then on our roadmap is starting to add non-destructive features to GIMP, which will allow you to, say, have a chain of operations that apply to a layer in an image. I'm going to clean up my desktop. This presentation is mostly going to be demos of things. So I have a folder containing quite a few images, and I'm going to start out with this crashed bug as a test image. And the simplest thing I could do with this image with GEGL is to just load this as a JPEG and output it as a ping. But that doesn't do very much to it. But the new format that has been kind of like added to GEGL for doing processing allows me to add a dash after this input of an image and output of another. And for instance, add a Gaussian blur and then a threshold. You don't see that much difference for that, so I'm going to swap the order of them. And I'm going to skip the output. Let's do the output anyways. Load the threshold and a small Gaussian blur. I can also say that I just want to do a Gaussian blur, but with a standard deviation on the x-axis of 50 pixels. I should maybe use an image that is smaller than this one for doing the testing, because it takes a little bit of time now. But that way one can write a long chain of conversions on Commandline like that. And then I have a smaller image here called boats. And I'm going to add a flare to it. There is no GEGL operation called flare. So it suggests that I should actually use an operation called GEGL lens flare instead. So that's a lens flare. And it has a lens flare in the middle of the image. If I say foo equals A, it will give me another error message that GEGL lens flare has no foo property, but has properties pos x and pos y. And now I'll move the lens flare to be further left in the image. But if I skip this whole output of the boats image, and the GEGL binary is compiled with abilities to show graphics on its own, it provides preview rendering of the operation with kind of a minimal auto-generated UI. And this is, I find this rather useful for testing new GEGL operations without having to launch GIMP and use the GEGL tool for testing operations. But the way I create the UI there is the same way that GIMP creates the UI for GEGL operations. I believe that the lens flare is in the menus here, and this is the same UI that I had there in the tool. And the auto-generated UIs that GIMP provides for GEGL operation also has metadata annotations for the properties, so we can get things like pickers for picking coordinates. Another thing that is possible to do with this command line is to reference images unused multiple times. I'm going to do this with, I'm going to do it with the bug again. And the way I would do it is that I say int equals foo, and I'm going to do a threshold. But I'm not going to do a threshold with a fixed value. I'm going to do a threshold where I reuse the original image and apply a Gaussian blur with a standard deviation of about half the image. And what the result of this should be is threshold that depends on the average color of the neighborhood of the pixels. So this will be the result even if I had a much lower contrast version of the image, so it will provide a contrast that is adapted to the image. I'm going to do that same experiment inside GIMP. Because I've also created a GEGL operation that understands the syntax I've been using on the command line. And this can be a good way of crashing GIMP. Is this readable? I'm not even sure if I can make it more readable.
Not on camera. Not on video.
Not on the video.
Another thing that's not happening.
Would that be more readable?
Yes, definitely.
So I have a pre-cooked version of that adaptive threshold here. And due to how this serialization format works, it doesn't rely on new lines or spacings. I didn't do anything now.
Do you turn off?
Okay. So if I change the radius of the Gaussian blur I'm using here, to be about 10% of the image, we will get the threshold where we get more of the local contrast out. And even lower, you get a very high frequency, or and this same way of dealing with images, I can take this thing, copy it, and open another image. And apply it to this image instead. But to get an idea about what it is ending up doing, I can remove everything but the Gaussian blur. So that is the values I was thresholding with. So where the image is dark, I would threshold with a very low value, and where the image is very bright, I would threshold with a bright value. And the GIMP plugin here also allows me to get error messages. So the same lens flare would give me context help for figuring out the parameters. Can be useful for experimentation. It's more of a programmer's thing than something an end user should have, but I could also imagine that on the way to figuring out how we do things in GIMP 3.0, that we might even have like a small editor per layer where one can add such things. That happens on top of the pixels, but if you paint on it, you actually paint on the original layer. Shouldn't be difficult to hack up. We have most of the infrastructure for doing it, but it's more important to get a new stable version of GIMP out as GIMP 2.10 than adding such hacks.
I have a hack. I want that.
You want that? Well, we need to do it in such a way that you can continue to open the files and they will work. And
actually it's super.
Just in fact, when you do that, it is already a layer filter on top of the layer. So what you're seeing on screen is actually a layer filter live edited in this tool Libre. It's just persistently saved in the image. When you hit OK or cancel, the filter goes away and the effect is applied. In the meantime, while you do it, it is an actual layer filter, and you could just save it with little effort, but then you would have to make sure it's compatible.
Yeah, the live previews are already a temporary one layer filter that gets merged into the layer each time you apply. GEGL can also use this syntax on the command line for videos. So I have a little video, I think it's this one I wanted to use.
This is the line.
And for simple things, could for instance do that. Then GEGL will use its FFmpeg operations for loading and saving frames and applying the set or the chain of filters that are put together. I'm not going to do that with the adaptive one, but then we will get an, you recognize the goat better, yeah. But it will take quite a bit longer to do both the Gaussian blur and the threshold for each frame. The threshold is a very quick filter. For the people who were at the Libre graphics meeting last year, they might have seen this video. This video was actually edited and rendered with GEGL itself. And if I open up this file called test.edl, it contains a very simple text file format for rigging up that kind of type of video editing. There's first some global parameters, and then each of these lines references a video file and the start frame and end frame to use, then dash dash like on the command line, and then the chain of operations that are used. And the last thing here extends the syntax I showed to also allow interpolating the parameters over time for the filter on a given clip. My involvement in GIMP and GEGL kind of started with having my own nonlinear video editor and compositing software that I stopped developing when I took over maintainership and lead development of GEGL. So I had kind of had in my mindset how I would have done it if I were to do a video editor. And I should push out the sources for a tiny little Cairo-based tool, which is what I used when I created last year's GEGL video. And to explain kind of technically what this thing is doing for doing the rendering, it knows the source video file it could have. There's a GEGL operation that takes as a parameter a file path and the frame number to extract. And in addition to that, I have the reserialized version of that GEGL chain. All of this gives me a set of textual information that I can do a hash of. And then I have a rendered frame cache of those hashes. Which means that for whenever I use that UI or reuse multiple processes, I end up basically having a bunch of files in a subfolder which contains known results for a combination of source videos and all the interpolated baked-in frames. So if I have a file there, it should be a PNG file that corresponds to the render settings of the frames. And in addition to that, I bake in the PCM data of the frame as PNG metadata. So if you have just been scrubbing around in that video editor UI, you actually have the full rendered both audio and video in this folder. And you could be using a separate external process for doing the rendering, so if things crashes or runs out of memory, it shouldn't matter because each rendering of a frame should be reproducible. And there's one more thing I want to show, which is not video things, and that is this mipmap preview rendering that has been added in GEGL. And that is something that ends up being problematic as GIMP is when you have really big images and you do very simple operations on them, even things like adjusting colors, because GIMP is doing all the processing on the actual full size of the image. I can show that by doing color temperature in this GEGL UI on not very big image, but quite big image. And on this computer, it is very slow and sluggish. I can make it even worse by, in addition to that color temperature, wanting to do an unsharp mask. Yeah, the UI is in practice not responding to me, but it will do the work, but right now it's blocking and waiting until it has all the things to show. And GIMP is a little bit more usable because it renders things in small chunks with GEGL still. But if I say that GEGL should only be doing its rendering on a mipmap level that is closest to actually what I'm going to show on the display, and try to do the same thing with color temperature. And but I haven't done all the processing on the image. I have just done operations where you can scale the parameters, which are distances in the image, like radiuses, and done the rendering on scaled down versions which implicitly already exist in the GEGL buffers. And if I zoom in, it stalls at some few points because then it says, oh, I actually have to render the actual higher resolution version. And I'm probably just going to open up for questions, if there are any. If there's no questions, I'm going to play with my new toy. Yeah?
I'm going to translate the question for her.
Older version, put in there.
Can we ask now? So Nora has a question where, let's say you have an image in GIMP and you want to apply 3 effects at the same time, let's say. Can you see the, in this new version probably, can you see the parameter changes of the 3 effects at the same time, or you have to apply one effect, then you would have to apply the other, and then the third one?
So our goal, when we start doing non-destructive editing, we don't do it currently, would be that it will work like a text editor. You can change anything, anywhere, any parameter anywhere, and get the result.
The live preview.
Yeah.
But this is not for the next version, it's for...
It's not for 2.10, which will be released this year. But what will then become the development version would probably quite quick have some way of doing it.
But actually in this GEGL chain operator, you could chain several operators, isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can...
Is the graph probably good for using the text UI since you could have several operations on it?
Yes, but you don't get sliders and UI. But there I was doing it. You could write multiple lines, and that is already in GIMP as it is now. What I showed, that is in the development version, and the ways you can make it crash, I have to fix because we are going to ship with that text UI as a separate operation you can use, but it's not something that is desirable as a final way for operators of GIMP to do their color adjustments and similar. And yeah, this is a WebGL version of the news print filter that is in GIMP that I ended up rewriting for GEGL. I could maybe do a lightning talk on how the actual filter of it works, because it's a tiny little OpenGL kernel that actually does all the work. But that would be a separate, much shorter topic. And then I think I've used my 20 minutes. So
Yeah, I guess so.
thank you.